The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the suburban street bathed in a dim orange glow. In this quiet corner of Ohio, the night usually arrived with only the hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark of a neighborhood dog. But tonight was different. Tires screeched in the distance, and flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of houses like a chaotic disco. Officer Martinez gripped the leash of Rex, his K9 partner, and scanned the cul-de-sac with alert eyes. The stolen SUV had been spotted minutes ago, weaving through the neighborhood, leaving a trail of chaos and fear behind it. Inside a small, modest house at the corner, little Emma sat cross-legged on the living room floor. At 3 years old, she had the uncanny ability to make everyone around her stop in wonder or exasperation, depending on the situation. Her curly brown hair fell over her forehead in soft waves, and her wide eyes reflected the warm glow of the lamp beside her. Blocks of various shapes and colors were scattered across the carpet, stacked into towers that teetered perilously. She was completely absorbed in her world, oblivious to the sirens and shouting outside. Emma's parents and James were tense, listening to the distant commotion but trying to keep the house calm. "She won't even know what's going on," whispered, brushing Emma's hair behind her ears. But even as she said it, the feeling of unease crept through her. There was something in the air tonight that didn't belong in their peaceful neighborhood. Outside, Officer Martinez and Rex moved cautiously. The dog's powerful muscles rippled beneath his coat with each step, his ears twitching at every sound. Trained to detect danger and respond with lightning-fast precision, Rex was one of the best in the department. Yet tonight, something unusual caught his attention. A tiny voice, high-pitched and trembling, cut through the cacophony of sirens, engines, and shouting. "Hi, doggy." Martinez froze, scanning the street. The voice was soft, almost delicate, but unmistakable. He saw a small figure on the porch of the corner house, a tiny child, no older than 3, clutching a stuffed bunny in one hand. Her other hand reached out toward Rex, fingers trembling slightly. The dog's body stiffened for a moment, trained instincts battling with curiosity. He had been through dangerous pursuits, sniffed out criminals hiding in dark alleys, and pulled suspects from cars in high-speed chases, but nothing had prepared him for this. The neighbors, peeking through blinds and doorways, held their breath. The child's innocence contrasted sharply with the tension thickening the street. Martinez took a cautious step forward, keeping one hand on Rex's harness. "Easy, Rex," he murmured, voice low. "It's just a kid." Emma's eyes sparkled as she knelt on the porch steps. "Hi, doggy," she repeated, her small voice full of wonder. She tilted her head, studying the massive canine in front of her like he was a gentle giant from one of her picture books. The contrast between her tiny frame and Rex's towering presence was almost cinematic. Martinez felt a mix of relief and disbelief. Who would have thought that a dangerous night could be interrupted by a 3-year-old? Then came the whisper that would change the course of the evening. Emma's lips moved, barely audible. "I lost my kitty." Martinez blinked. His grip on Rex's harness tightened for a fraction of a second. The officers on the street shifted uneasily, unsure if they were witnessing bravery, recklessness, or something else entirely. The stolen car's pursuit had paused as if the night itself was holding its breath. A 3-year-old, speaking to a police dog, had suddenly stolen the scene from seasoned law enforcement. Rex, trained to read body language and sense emotional cues, froze for a beat, then slowly lowered his massive head. His eyes, intelligent and piercing, softened as he tilted his head toward the child. He wasn't aggressive. He was listening. He understood on some instinctual level that the tiny human in front of him was in distress, not danger. Martinez felt a knot in his stomach loosen. He had seen Rex respond to threats, chase down suspects, and protect his team. But he had never seen him respond to something as simple, yet profound, as a child's need. Emma's small voice trembled again, this time with urgency. "Can you help me find her?" She held the stuffed bunny to her chest. The innocence, the vulnerability, the raw honesty in her request seemed to ripple across the street. Martinez exchanged a glance with his partner, Officer Davis, who was watching from the patrol car. Their faces mirrored the same disbelief and awe. Then a faint meow echoed from somewhere behind the house. It was soft, almost pleading. Emma's eyes widened. "There!" she shouted, pointing toward the alley that led behind the homes. Martinez's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that this tiny plea would lead them to something or someone they had been missing all night? The neighborhood held its collective breath. Officers paused, sirens dimmed, tires stopped squealing. A moment of magic, or perhaps fate, hung in the air. A 3-year-old had spoken to a dog trained for danger, and in that moment the line between innocence and heroism blurred. Martinez took a deep breath. "Rex," he murmured, giving the dog a gentle nudge. Rex responded immediately, ears pricked, muscles coiled, yet his steps were cautious and deliberate as he followed the child's gesture toward the alley. Emma's parents had come to the porch now, fear and awe etched across their faces. "Emma, honey, stay here," called softly. But the child was already focused on the tiny drama unfolding. A lost cat, a police dog, and now something much bigger than anyone could anticipate. And in that split second, as Rex moved toward the shadowy alley with Emma watching, no one in the neighborhood could have predicted what would happen next, or what a 3-year-old would say to change everything. The quiet street was no longer quiet, and the night had just begun to reveal its secrets. The alley was dark, narrow, and smelling faintly of damp leaves and garbage. Martinez's boots crunched on the gravel as he followed Rex, the dog moving with precision yet strangely gentle purpose. Emma, still clutching her stuffed bunny, tiptoed behind them, her small feet barely making a sound. The glow of streetlights from the main road barely reached this hidden passage, leaving shadows that danced like dark spirits along the walls of the brick houses. Rex paused mid-step, nose twitching as he sniffed the air. His ears flicked back and forth, muscles tensing. Martinez could feel the energy in the dog, a mix of training and instinct. Every shadow, every whisper of wind was assessed for threat. But then Rex did something Martinez had never seen. He sat, eyes fixed on the tiny figure in the alley entrance. Emma froze, her chest rising and falling in nervous excitement. "I lost my kitty," she repeated, her voice barely audible, yet clear in the quiet of the alley. She extended her free hand toward Rex, the gesture full of trust and innocence. The dog tilted his head as though he understood. Martinez crouched beside him, careful not to break the fragile bond forming between child and canine. The officers on the street outside could see only the silhouettes through the occasional gaps between the houses. Some whispered in disbelief. "Is that a toddler controlling Rex?" one murmured. "No way," another said. But even as doubt filled their minds, a small, plaintive meow echoed from somewhere deeper in the alley. Emma's eyes lit up. "There, that's her," she exclaimed, pointing toward a shadowy corner between 2 dumpsters. Martinez could hear the quickening of his own heartbeat. Rex sprang into action, but unlike his usual high-alert charge, there was no aggression, just focus, precision, and a strange tenderness toward the child. Emma's tiny figure, dwarfed by the dog, seemed to guide him almost magically. The tabby cat, small and frightened, was huddled behind a rusted shopping cart. Its fur was matted and streaked with grime from the long night outside. Emma took a cautious step forward, reaching toward the trembling creature. Rex followed at her side, not threatening, but herding the cat gently, ensuring it wouldn't bolt into danger. Martinez shook his head in amazement. This was not what anyone expected from a police dog trained to apprehend criminals. Emma spoke softly, almost like she was singing a lullaby. "It's okay, kitty, you're safe now." The cat blinked its green eyes at her and then, with a tentative meow, leapt into her arms. Tears streamed down her small face as she hugged the tabby to her chest. Martinez felt an unexpected swell of emotion. The night's tension, the adrenaline from the pursuit, even the fear of the stolen vehicle, all of it seemed to pause. But the moment of calm shattered with a distant sound, the crunch of gravel under hurried footsteps. Martinez's eyes scanned the shadows, his hand instinctively tightening on Rex's harness. From between the dumpsters, a figure emerged, a man crouched low, attempting to stay unseen. He froze when he noticed the police dog and the child with the cat. Panic flashed in his eyes. "Stay behind me, Emma," Martinez whispered, his voice firm yet gentle. Rex growled low, a sound meant to warn rather than attack. Emma's small hand found the dog's fur and gripped it, not in fear but in trust, as if she knew that Rex would protect her, and perhaps even the frightened man in the shadows. The man's eyes darted to the stolen SUV parked a few houses down, its engine running, a faint puff of smoke rising from the exhaust. He cursed under his breath, realizing he had underestimated the night's guardians. The tiny human and the massive dog were more formidable than he could have imagined. Martinez and the other officers on the street began to close in, sirens subdued for now, watching the unlikely confrontation unfold in real time. Emma, clutching the cat, tilted her head at the man. "You shouldn't take things that aren't yours," she said, her voice innocent but sharp with conviction. Martinez felt a chill run down his spine. The child's words were simple, yet they carried a weight far beyond her years. Even the man seemed momentarily disarmed by her presence. Rex stepped slightly forward, his stance alert, ears pricked, but not aggressive. He watched the man like a living shadow detector, ready to respond if the slightest threat emerged. Martinez could see the conflict in the man's eyes, guilt, fear, and disbelief all mingling. No one expected a 3-year-old to challenge him, and no one expected a dog trained for aggression to respond to her plea with gentleness. Then the man made a sudden move. He reached into his pocket. Martinez's heart jumped. For a second the world seemed to stop. The officers tensed, ready for the worst. But instead of a weapon, a small object emerged, a phone. The man's face drained of color as he realized how exposed he was. I didn't mean to," he stammered, eyes darting between the toddler, the cat, and the dog. "I just—" Emma took a tiny step forward, holding the cat protectively. "You have to be nice," she said firmly, her 3-year-old conviction echoing in the alley. Martinez's jaw nearly dropped. Even Rex seemed to sense the tension dissolve, his body relaxing just a fraction, tail flicking slightly. The man's shoulders sagged, resignation replacing his panic. From the street, the neighbors whispered among themselves, astonished. No one had anticipated that a toddler and a dog could halt a crime in its tracks. Martinez allowed himself a small, incredulous smile. Tonight, the rules of law enforcement had been rewritten in real time by innocence and instinct. But even as the adrenaline eased, a faint unease lingered. The stolen SUV still sat idling a few houses away. Emma held her rescued cat, unaware of how close the night had come to turning dangerous. Martinez glanced at Rex, whose gaze remained steady on the man. The situation wasn't over, but the impossible had already occurred. And as the shadows of the alley seemed to lean closer, everyone, officers, neighbors, even the man, realized one truth. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the heaviest weight. The night was far from over, and no one could predict what the next moments would reveal. The alley was quiet now, but the tension hung thick in the air, like fog rolling over a midnight street. Emma, holding her rescued Tabby tight, took careful steps behind Rex and Officer Martinez, her tiny sneakers crunching softly on gravel. The glow of the streetlights barely reached this far, leaving long, dark shadows that seemed to slither along the brick walls. Martinez could feel every instinct in his body on edge, trained for danger, for unpredictability. But tonight, nothing in his career had prepared him for a toddler who seemed to command a K9 as easily as she held her cat. Emma's voice trembled again, small but resolute. "We have to find Mr. Whisker's home." She tilted her head, eyes shining with earnest determination. Rex, for all his training and power, paused to glance at her as if acknowledging her authority. Martinez shook his head in awe. He had seen Rex follow complex commands, pursue dangerous suspects, and track scents across forests and streets, but never had he witnessed such a silent, unspoken understanding between dog and child. The officers outside the alley murmured among themselves, unsure of what they were witnessing. Officer Davis, standing near the patrol car, whispered into his radio, "Do you see this? The kid, the dog, I swear it's like they're talking." No one answered immediately. Even the veteran officers were frozen, captivated by the improbable scene unfolding in the shadows. Emma's parents had stepped to the edge of the alley. Hands were clasped tightly over her mouth, her heart pounding as she tried to restrain her urge to run to her daughter. James's face was pale, but his eyes gleamed with a mixture of fear and wonder. "Emma, sweetie, stay close," urged softly, but Emma's focus was entirely on Rex and the search that had already begun. A faint sound, almost imperceptible over the distant hum of the city, came from deeper in the alley, a soft, desperate meow. Emma's tiny fingers trembled as she pointed toward the corner where shadows twisted like smoke. "There it is," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of hope. Rex's muscles coiled instinctively, ready to move at a moment's notice. But instead of a charge or bark, he moved slowly, carefully, almost reverently, as if honoring the child's delicate instructions. The tabby cat in Emma's arms mewed again, and she tilted her head. "It's okay," she murmured softly. "We'll get you home." Martinez felt his chest tight. The street was still tense. The stolen SUV and the fleeing suspect loomed somewhere nearby. But this small act of kindness, this quiet bravery from a 3-year-old, had shifted the energy of the night. Even Rex seemed attuned to it, his tail flicking gently in rhythm with Emma's words. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from behind a pile of discarded boxes. Martinez froze, hand instinctively gripping Rex's harness. The man from earlier, the one connected to the stolen SUV, hadn't fled entirely. He crouched low, partially hidden by shadows, watching the scene unfold. His face was pale, eyes wide with disbelief and fear. No one expected a toddler to command the attention of a police dog, much less influence the course of a night that had begun with a high-speed chase and ended in something that resembled magic. Emma's small voice broke through the tension. "Rex, can you help me?" The dog's ears pricked, his nose twitching as he moved closer to the shadows, guided by her unseen direction. Martinez felt his stomach tighten. The man shifted, suddenly aware that he was being confronted not by a fully grown officer, but by a 3-year-old and her K9 companion. The audacity, the innocence, and the courage coalesced into something formidable. Emma knelt slightly, her small hand extended in an invitation. "Please," she whispered, "help me." Her voice carried a mix of urgency and calm that belied her age. Martinez could see the power of words spoken without threat, how the simplest plea could redirect the instincts of a trained police dog. Rex responded instantly, stepping into the alley with a newfound determination. The air seemed to hum with anticipation. The man, realizing he was being silently by the child and the dog, swallowed hard. His hands twitched near his pockets, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Martinez's eyes never left him, ready to intervene, but sensing that Rex's presence and Emma's bravery might be enough to resolve the tension. Emma's lips moved again, barely audible. "I know you're scared, but you don't have to run." Her voice was soft, coaxing, almost melodic, carrying the weight of truth and empathy. Martinez felt a shiver run down his spine. No tactical training, no pursuit could have produced the same effect. The man froze entirely, caught between fear, guilt, and the impossibility of the situation. A toddler and a dog holding him accountable with nothing more than presence and words. Then the alley seemed to hold its breath. The stolen SUV's distant engine rumble was a reminder that danger had not vanished. Yet at this moment it didn't matter. Emma, tiny and unassuming, had commanded attention in a way that no one had expected. Even Rex, fierce and disciplined, moved gently now, guided entirely by her instinctual leadership. The officers outside whispered, amazed. "She's controlling the dog," one said, barely above a whisper. "How is that even possible?" Emma took another step forward, her eyes locked on the shadow where the man crouched. "You can stop now," she said softly, almost as if she were telling a story, not issuing a command. "You don't have to be mean." The words, simple yet profound, carried a weight no adult could ignore. Martinez's heart raced. In that split second, the scene in the alley was no longer about a stolen car or a chase. It was about courage, compassion, and the unexpected power of innocence. And then from the far end of the alley, a faint meow echoed once more. Emma's eyes lit up with recognition. She whispered, "That's her," pointing toward the shadows. Martinez exchanged a glance with the other officers. The child's instincts had led them here. The night's dangerous chase had transformed into a rescue mission led by a 3-year-old, a police dog, and the smallest, bravest heart in the alley. But even as hope shimmered in the dim light, Martinez knew this was far from over. Somewhere in the shadows, the night still held secrets, and not all of them were visible or predictable. The alley stretched before them like a narrow tunnel of shadows. Brick walls on either side loomed overhead, damp with evening dew, while discarded boxes and overturned trash cans created a labyrinth of obstacles. Martinez moved cautiously, his hand gripping Rex's harness as the dog navigated each shadow with a precision born of years of training. Yet tonight, it was Martinez guiding Rex. It was the small, unwavering force of Emma. At 3 years old, she seemed impossibly confident, her wide brown eyes fixed on the darkness ahead, her tiny fingers clutching her rescued tabby tightly. Emma's voice, soft but steady, broke the quiet. "This way," she whispered, pointing to a corner where a faint glimmer of fur caught the light. Rex's ears twitched, muscles coiling as he advanced. Martinez followed, heart pounding. He had seen the dog handle suspects in high-speed pursuits, had watched Rex apprehend criminals twice his size, but this was different. This was instinct and innocence converging in a moment that explanation. Behind a rusted dumpster, the tabby cat huddled in a shadow, trembling with fear. Its tiny body was soaked with dew, fur matted with grime. Emma knelt, stretching out her small hands. "It's okay, kitty, you're safe now," she murmured. The tabby mewed plaintively as if it understood the child's words. With a cautious leap, it scrambled into Emma's arms. She hugged it to her chest, her relief radiating in waves so strong even Martinez felt it. But the night's fragile calm shattered the instant a figure emerged from the darkness. The man, connected to the stolen SUV, crouched low behind a pile of trash, trying to remain unseen. His face was pale, eyes wide with panic. Martinez's pulse quickened. He instinctively tightened his grip on Rex's harness. The dog growled low, a rumble that resonated through the alley walls, warning the man without aggression. Yet Emma, oblivious to the full scope of danger, stepped forward. "You shouldn't take things that aren't yours," she said simply, her voice clear and confident. Martinez felt a shiver run down his spine. A 3-year-old, speaking from innocence rather than authority, had the weight of moral judgment in her words. The man froze. For the first time that night, he realized he was cornered, not by guns, not by sirens, but by a child and a dog. Rex advanced slowly, his eyes locked on the man. Martinez could feel the tension coiling in his own chest. He had been trained for moments like this, but the unpredictability of a toddler commanding the situation left him breathless. The officers outside the alley had arrived now, keeping a safe distance but ready to intervene if necessary. Lights from patrol cars cast long, jagged shadows across the alley, highlighting the surreal tableau unfolding. A tiny girl, a trembling cat, a towering police dog, and a criminal frozen in disbelief. Emma's grip on the tabby tightened instinctively. She tilted her head, studying the man. "You don't have to be mean," she said softly, as if issuing a gentle warning. Martinez's jaw tightened. The child's words were disarming, cutting through fear and adrenaline with a force that no adult had expected. The man's hands trembled near his pockets, and Martinez felt a flicker of hope that the confrontation could be resolved without violence. The man glanced toward the stolen SUV parked a few houses away, its engine idling and headlights casting long, eerie beams across the street. He cursed under his breath. He had thought he could escape unnoticed, but a 3-year-old and a dog had turned the night against him. His options were shrinking by the second. Martinez could feel Rex tense, ready to act, yet somehow restrained, as if guided by Emma's intuition rather than strict commands. Emma took another small step forward, her voice soft but unwavering. "Can you stop now?" she asked. "You don't have to be scary." Her plea was more powerful than any shout or threat. Martinez watched, astonished, as the man's body language shifted from defiance to resignation. The weight of her innocence and moral clarity pressed down on him like a tangible force. Rex sat back slightly, tail flicking, as if acknowledging that Emma's judgment was enough to guide the situation. Martinez felt a mixture of awe and disbelief. No training, no tactics, no experience could have predicted the power wielded by this tiny human and her four-legged companion. The alley seemed suspended in time, every shadow, every whisper of wind, every distant siren held in delicate balance. Then came the faint sound of movement from the far end of the alley, the soft mewing of another cat. Emma's eyes lit up. "There, that's her," she cried. Martinez's heart raced. The child's intuition had led them not just to safety, but to the next clue in the night's unfolding mystery. He signaled to the other officers to remain alert but hold position, allowing the moment to resolve itself organically. Emma knelt, extending a small hand toward the shadowed corner. The tabby in her arms mewed again, nudging her gently, as if guiding her toward the final piece of the puzzle. The man, frozen in the glow of streetlights and Rex's intense gaze, seemed caught between fear, guilt, and disbelief. He could neither flee nor resist, trapped in a confrontation he had never imagined, stopped not by force, but by the improbable courage of a 3-year-old. For a fleeting moment, the world outside the alley disappeared. There were no sirens, no stolen cars, no criminal intent, only the quiet, miraculous interplay of innocence and instinct. Martinez's eyes followed Rex's every movement, marveling at the dog's restraint and responsiveness. Emma's small voice, steady and clear, guided both dog and officers through the final stretch of the alley. And then, just as the tension peaked, the man made a slow, trembling motion. He raised his hand slightly, surrendering not only to the police presence but to the moral authority of a child he could not intimidate. The night had shifted. The chase, the fear, and the stolen SUV became background noise. In the alley, a tiny girl and a massive dog had taken control. Martinez exhaled slowly, realizing that this was a story no one would ever forget, not for the crime, but for the unlikely heroes who had stopped it. Yet even as relief began to settle over the alley, Martinez knew one thing. The night's most astonishing moments were far from over. Something unexpected was still waiting just around the corner, and no one, least of all a 3-year-old, would predict what would happen next. The alley was thick with shadows, but the tension was heavier still. Martinez could feel every instinct in his body on high alert. The man crouched in the darkness, his eyes darting between the tiny girl holding her tabby and the towering police dog at her side. Rex growled low, a warning, but not an attack. His massive body coiled, ready to move at the slightest sign of danger. Emma, oblivious to the true weight of the situation, tilted her head. "You have to be nice," she said, her voice calm but resolute. The words carried a clarity and authority that even Martinez couldn't ignore. The man froze, as if her 3-year-old conviction had pressed down on him with the force of the law itself. From the street, the stolen SUV glimmered under the dim streetlights. Its engine idled like a predator, waiting for its owner to return. Martinez's eyes flicked toward the vehicle, noting the danger it posed, but his attention remained fixed on the tiny figure in the alley. Emma had unwittingly taken command of the night. Her innocence had transformed the tension into something unrecognizable, something larger than fear. The man's shoulders slumped. He had counted on fear, on the chaos of sirens and flashing lights, on the instinctive reactions of trained officers, but he hadn't counted on the power of a child's presence. Martinez felt a flicker of disbelief. Here they were, in a dark alley in a quiet Ohio neighborhood, and it was Emma, 3 years old, who was dictating the flow of events. Rex stepped forward slowly, muscles coiled but movement measured. Martinez followed, cautious, knowing the dog's power could end a chase in seconds, but also knowing that tonight, Rex's obedience was not to Martinez, not to protocol, but to the child's unspoken guidance. Emma held her tabby close, her eyes wide, never flinching. Then the man bolted. Panic him. He dove toward the stolen SUV, tires squealing on the asphalt, engine roaring as he tried to escape. Martinez's heart jumped. "Rex!" he shouted, urging the dog forward. The chase reignited, but it was unlike any pursuit Martinez had experienced. Rex bounded through the alley, every muscle in his body taut, yet his focus remained unbroken, his gaze locked on the fleeing man. Emma gasped, gripping her tabby, pointing wildly. "Go get him, doggy," she shouted. Her voice rang with certainty, a command laced with trust. Martinez's heart pounded. Could a child's words really direct a police dog in a high-stakes pursuit? The night had already expectation, and now it threatened to redefine reality itself. The man swerved, tires squealing, narrowly missing a mailbox. Rex closed the distance, powerful strides eating up the asphalt, ears flapping in the wind. Martinez sprinted behind him, shouting warnings, coordinating officers but keeping a careful eye on Emma. She crouched behind a low wall, her tabby safe in her arms, watching the incredible scene unfold. The neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the spectacle. A toddler, a police dog, and a fleeing criminal weaving through shadows and light. The stolen SUV careened toward a dead end, tires skidding against the curb. Rex was already there, stepping into the path with unwavering authority. Martinez could see the man's eyes widen in disbelief. He had outrun officers, sirens, and the night itself, but he had not accounted for the bond between a child and a dog. Rex growled low, forcing the man to slow, to consider the consequences he had ignored for too long. Emma's small voice carried across the street. "Stop! You don't have to be mean," she shouted, fearless in the face of danger. Martinez felt the hairs on his neck rise. Even from behind, the man froze. Her words, simple and pure, held a gravity no adult could replicate. The SUV slowed, jerking to a halt as Rex positioned himself firmly in front. Martinez ran up, hand on the dog's harness, but knowing he wouldn't need to act. The man's hands shook, fists gripping the steering wheel. He was trapped not by weapons, not by sirens, but by innocence and instinct. He glanced over his shoulder at Emma, the tiny child whose words had become a moral blockade he could not breach. From the edge of the sidewalk, neighbors whispered in awe. "Is that a toddler?" one said. "And the dog is stopping him." Another shook her head, unable to believe what she was seeing. Martinez exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease, but only slightly. The night was still dangerous, and the man's fate was far from certain. Then in a trembling voice the man muttered, I didn't mean to steal." His eyes flicked nervously from Emma to Rex, and finally to Martinez. "I just needed the money, I didn't think." The words tumbled out, faltering under the weight of guilt and the impossible sight before him. A 3-year-old toddler controlling the outcome of the night with a cat, a dog, and a voice too small to command yet too powerful to ignore. Emma took a cautious step forward, holding her tabby closer. "You can stop now," she said softly. "It's okay if you're nice." Her simple kindness, unwavering courage, and innocence held the man in place. Martinez felt a shiver run down his spine. No lesson from training, no amount of authority, could replicate the moral clarity of a child speaking truth to fear. Rex lowered his massive head slightly, tail flicking, his posture relaxed yet alert. He had completed the first part of his task, ensuring the man understood that violence or escape was unnecessary. Martinez exchanged a glance with Officer Davis. "I've never seen anything like this," he muttered. The alley, once a tense, now felt suspended in time, a stage for an extraordinary display of innocence, trust, and instinct. But even as the stolen SUV idled, the night's suspense had not entirely lifted. Somewhere beyond the alley, danger still lurked. The man, though halted, had not fully surrendered. Martinez's instincts told him the story wasn't over. And as Emma crouched, gazing at Rex with wide, shining eyes, the officers realized, this child, this dog, and this night were far from finished. The shadows seemed to deepen, whispering of secrets yet to unfold. The stolen SUV, the fleeing suspect, and the unlikely heroes, Emma and Rex, stood on the cusp of the next chapter. Rex's powerful legs tore across the asphalt, muscles coiled like springs, paws striking the pavement with precision. Martinez followed closely, adrenaline coursing through him, his heart hammering in sync with the dog's rapid strides. Emma crouched behind a low fence, clutching her tabby, eyes wide as the unbelievable chase unfolded. Her voice rang out, small but commanding. "Go get him, doggy." It was both a plea and a cheer, and somehow Rex responded as though her words were the only command that mattered. The man in the stolen SUV skidded around a corner, tires screeching against the asphalt. He had fled from officers before, relied on darkness and speed, but he had not anticipated being pursued by a police dog so expertly guided by a toddler. Every turn he took, every desperate attempt to evade capture, was anticipated by Rex, who moved with instinctual precision. Martinez shouted directions to coordinate officers, but it was clear the dog's focus was singular: the fleeing criminal and the safety of the child watching from the sidelines. Neighbors poured onto their porches, flashlights in hand, whispering among themselves in disbelief. "Is that a 3-year-old?" one murmured. "And the dog, she's directing it." Another shook his head, eyes wide. Even the most seasoned officers had stopped questioning the impossible. They were witnessing a unique alliance: innocence and instinct, courage and loyalty, converging to stop a crime in progress. Emma's small voice carried across the street. "Stop! You don't have to run." Her words were steady, fearless. Martinez felt a shiver run down his spine. She had no concept of danger, no training, yet somehow her conviction had weight enough to influence both man and dog. The man's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white, eyes flicking between the toddler, the cat, and the dog at his heels. Fear him, sharp and immediate, as he realized escape was impossible. Rex closed the distance. Every leap, every stride was a demonstration of strength and focus. Martinez ran beside him, shouting warnings, signaling officers to close in, but careful not to obstruct the dog's precision. The man swerved, tires clipping the curb, bouncing over debris in a desperate attempt to escape. But Rex's speed was unmatched, instincts honed over years of training, his attention unwavering. Emma's tiny hand clutched her tabby as she leaned forward, pointing toward the oncoming chaos. "You can't get away," she called. Martinez felt his breath catch. The audacity, the clarity, and the innocence of her proclamation somehow amplified the tension in the night. It was impossible, absurd, but it was also working. The SUV lurched violently around another corner, but Rex anticipated the turn, cutting off the path with perfect timing. Martinez could see the man's face twist in disbelief. He had outrun officers, ignored sirens, navigated through darkness, yet here he was, trapped by a toddler and a dog. The absurdity of it all struck Martinez so strongly that he had to force himself to keep moving. Suddenly, the vehicle swerved dangerously close to a lamppost. Martinez shouted a warning, but Rex was already in position, his massive body coiling to intercept. The man slammed the brakes, tires screeching, engine roaring. Martinez's eyes widened as Rex stepped into the path with deliberate authority. The dog's presence was enough. The man's panic-filled gaze met Emma's fearless eyes, and for a moment it was as if time had frozen. "Stop, you don't have to be mean." Emma's voice cut through the night. The cat in her arms mewed softly, as if echoing her plea. Martinez felt the adrenaline in his chest spike again. It wasn't a command, it was a truth. The man could stop, and in that pause, the moral clarity of a 3-year-old held more authority than the chaos of the chase. The man's hands shook. The SUV's engine idled as he realized resistance was pointless. He glanced toward the toddler, toward Rex, toward the officers slowly encircling him. He was trapped, not by bullets, not by force, but by courage and instinct. Martinez exhaled slowly, allowing the tension to ease slightly. The chase was effectively over. Rex relaxed his stance just enough to indicate the immediate danger had passed but remained alert, muscles still coiled. Martinez ran up to the SUV, hands still on the dog's harness, ready to intervene if necessary. The man slowly opened the driver's side door, his face pale, guilt and fear mingling in a complex tangle. He raised his hands in surrender, meeting Emma's eyes. You stopped me," he muttered, disbelief in his voice. By a child and a dog." Martinez felt a wry smile creep onto his face, even as adrenaline still pulsed in his veins. This was not a story he could have imagined in training, and yet here it was, unfolding in real time, impossible and astonishing. Emma took a small step forward, her tabby cradled protectively. "You can be nice now," she said simply. "That's all." Martinez felt a lump in his throat. The words were simple, yet they held more authority than any arrest or command. Rex nudged the man's arm gently, as if echoing the child's moral judgment. Neighbors continued to watch, whispering in awe. Phones were out, capturing the surreal tableau. A toddler, a police dog, a surrendered man, and a stolen SUV now impotent in the hands of a 3-year-old's courage. Martinez shook his head, marveling at the scene. He had spent years in law enforcement, but no training, no tactic had prepared him for a moment like this. And yet, even as relief began to settle over the street, Martinez sensed the night wasn't finished. The stolen SUV, the criminal's intentions, and the city's unpredictability still hung like a shadow over the quiet neighborhood. Emma, her wide eyes shining, had unknowingly become the linchpin of an extraordinary night, one that would soon ripple far beyond the alley. For a fleeting second, Martinez allowed himself to marvel at the impossible truth. A child's voice, a dog's instinct, and an unshakable sense of right had halted a criminal pursuit. The night's climax was near, but the final resolution, the moment when the world would fully realize the unlikely heroism of a 3-year-old, had yet to arrive. The shadows of the street seemed to lean closer, holding secrets still unspoken, as Martinez prepared for what would come next, the conclusion of a chase that no one would ever forget. The night hung heavy over the quiet Ohio street, yet in the glow of the patrol car lights, a surreal calm had settled. The stolen SUV sat idling, its engine a low, persistent growl as though it were protesting its capture. The man, hands raised and trembling, remained behind the wheel, eyes flicking nervously between the toddler, the cat in her arms, and Rex, the massive German shepherd who had been both pursuer and protector. Martinez crouched beside the dog, letting the tension roll off him in measured breaths, though every fiber of his being was alert. Emma, oblivious to the full magnitude of the situation, knelt on the sidewalk beside her tabby, her eyes wide and earnest. "You have to tell the truth," she said softly, as if speaking to the man directly from a place beyond authority or fear. Martinez's jaw tightened. He had seen criminals arrested hundreds of times, but he had never witnessed a confession coaxed from guilt by a 3-year-old's words. The audacity, innocence, and moral clarity in Emma's voice left him speechless. The man swallowed hard, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I didn't mean to steal," he muttered, voice shaking. His eyes darted at the little girl, incredulous. I didn't think it would go this far." He exhaled, shoulders sagging under the weight of shame and disbelief. The words stumbled out, raw and unpolished, yet each one carried the truth of a man confronted by something far larger than law enforcement, the force of a child's conscience. Rex shifted his weight, sniffing the air, tail flicking slowly as if gauging the sincerity of the confession. Martinez nodded subtly to the other officers, signaling restraint. There was no need for force. The moral gravity of the moment had rendered it unnecessary. The man's admission hung in the air, fragile yet undeniable. Emma reached out a tiny hand, patting the tabby against her chest as she regarded him with wide, unwavering eyes. "You can be nice now," she said simply. "That's all it takes." Her tone was neither scolding nor pleading. It was a statement of truth. Martinez felt a lump in his throat, aware that the entire night had been reframed by this child's presence. Rex, sensing the shift, lowered his head slightly, standing alert but calm. Even the man's fear seemed to settle, replaced by a hesitant, almost awed acceptance. The officers outside the street watched quietly, aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Some whispered into their radios, "You're not going to believe this, it's a toddler." Cameras on phones recorded the scene, capturing the miraculous intersection of innocence and justice. Martinez shook his head, marveling at the surreal tableau. A tiny girl, her rescued cat, a police dog, and a man humbled not by threat or punishment but by courage far smaller than himself. The man finally exhaled fully, the tension draining from his body. I'm sorry," he said, voice nearly breaking. "I shouldn't have done it. I just—" His confession faltered, but the weight of guilt carried it forward. Emma blinked, processing his words with the clarity of someone far beyond her years. "It's okay," she said, gently patting the tabby. "Just don't do it again." Martinez felt a rush of disbelief and admiration. Here was morality distilled to its form, a lesson delivered by a child without judgment, threat, or anger. The stolen SUV remained in the street, engine rumbling softly, a reminder of what had almost escalated into catastrophe. Martinez walked up to the man, hand on Rex's harness, voice steady but firm. "Sir, we're going to take you in for questioning," he said. The man nodded, silent, accepting the inevitability of accountability. But even in submission, his face reflected awe, the kind of awe that comes from encountering courage and justice in a form entirely unexpected. Emma shifted slightly, still holding the tabby, her eyes bright with innocence and wonder. "You're going to be okay," she said softly, a tiny hand brushing Rex's fur. Martinez watched the interaction, stunned by the calm authority in her voice, the unshakable trust she placed in the dog, and the subtle impact she had on everyone around her. The night had begun with chaos, fear, and a stolen car, but it was ending with understanding, empathy, and a sense of justice delivered in the form imaginable. Rex nudged the man's arm gently, a silent affirmation of Emma's judgment. Martinez couldn't help but smile at the scene. The dog, the child, and even the trembling criminal had become participants in a lesson that transcended law enforcement. Emma's bravery and unfiltered sense of right and wrong had shifted the course of the night, altering the fates of everyone present. Neighbors, now gathering at the edges of the street, whispered in disbelief, sharing the story in hushed, awed tones. Some had phones out, recording the scene, while others simply watched, caught in the magic of a moment, that explanation. A 3-year-old had altered the course of a criminal pursuit, transformed fear into clarity, and brought resolution in a way no officer or strategy could have anticipated. As the man was gently guided toward the patrol car, still stunned by the encounter, Martinez looked down at Emma. You really saved the night," he said softly, voice filled with awe. She smiled, patting her tabby against her chest. "Rex helped too," she said matter-of-factly, gesturing to the dog who wagged his tail, proud and alert. Martinez shook his head, realizing that tonight would be a story told for years. How courage, innocence, and instinct could converge to stop crime in a most unexpected way. Yet even as relief settled over the street, Martinez knew one truth. The night's most remarkable heroics had already occurred. Emma, 3 years old with a cat and a dog, had rewritten what it meant to confront fear, command respect, and deliver justice. And as the patrol car drove the man away, lights flashing, the neighborhood held its breath, still absorbing the reality of what had transpired. For Martinez, the lesson was clear. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the heaviest weight, and courage is not measured by size, strength, or age, but by the heart behind the words. The night was far from ordinary, and one little girl, a police dog, and a rescued tabby had made sure it would never be forgotten. The street was quiet again, though the air hummed with the adrenaline of what had just unfolded. The stolen SUV had been secured, the man taken into custody, and yet no one could shake the surreal energy left behind. A 3-year-old, a police dog, and a rescued tabby had rewritten the night's narrative. Martinez crouched beside Rex, letting the dog sniff the fresh night air, muscles relaxing finally. But the child's presence still radiated a force that made everything feel extraordinary. Emma stood on the sidewalk, cradling her tabby with gentle care, her curly hair sticking to her cheeks from the night's exertions. Her eyes sparkled with pride and wonder, completely unaware of the gravity of what she had accomplished. Neighbors peeked from windows and porches, whispering excitedly, some filming discreetly on their phones. "Did you see that?" one mother said to her husband. A toddler stopped him, and the dog listened. Others nodded, faces filled with awe and disbelief. And James rushed to Emma, gathering her into their arms. "Sweetheart, you were amazing," said, voice trembling with a mixture of relief and pride. James nodded, eyes wide, gripping Emma tightly as if the mere act of holding her could anchor the surreal night to reality. "You saved the day, kiddo," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. Emma smiled, still clutching her tabby, her tiny face alight with innocence, unaware she had become the heroine of a story no one would forget. Martinez approached, hand on Rex's harness, giving the dog a reassuring pat. He turned to Emma, kneeling down to her level. "Emma," he said, voice soft but full of awe, you helped us all tonight. You were brave. You kept everyone safe." Emma blinked, tilting her head as though she hadn't understood completely. "Rex helped too," she said matter-of-factly, stroking the dog's fur. Martinez chuckled softly, realizing that she shared the spotlight with her loyal companion. The neighbors, emboldened by the incredible event, began to gather closer, offering applause, congratulations, and whispered admiration. Some filmed the moment, capturing the tiny girl whose words had halted a fleeing criminal. Phones clicked, flashes flickered, and a sense of communal awe spread through the street. For a moment, the world felt larger than itself. A tiny child had reminded everyone that courage and morality could come from the most unexpected places. Officer Davis approached Martinez, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've seen a lot in my career," he said quietly, "but I've never seen a toddler lead a K-9 like that, let alone stop a crime." Martinez nodded, still absorbing the events. The night had begun with chaos and fear, with sirens and stolen vehicles, yet it ended with clarity, courage, and an unspoken lesson in the power of innocence. Emma's tabby mewed softly, pressing against her chest. She turned to Rex, who wagged his tail lazily now, alert but calm. "Good job, doggy," she said, her voice full of gentle certainty. Martinez realized that the dog's loyalty and training had met an unparalleled force, the trust and confidence of a child who believed without hesitation that right and wrong were more important than size, power, or fear. Even the man in custody, escorted to the patrol car, had glanced back at Emma, a mixture of awe and humility in his eyes. Her words had disarmed him, her presence had stopped him, and her moral clarity had forced him to confront his actions. No siren, no handcuffs, no officer's command could have had the same effect. Emma had shifted the balance of the night entirely. Martinez exhaled, the weight of the night's events settling into a calm sense of awe. He looked at the tabby, then at Emma, then at Rex, realizing that heroism had many forms, and tonight the smallest of them had shown the. "You know," he said quietly to the officers nearby, "sometimes the ones you least expect change everything." Emma, holding her cat, looked up at the sky. The stars were just beginning to emerge, twinkling faintly above the suburban rooftops. She tilted her head, a small smile on her lips, as if the entire night had been an adventure she barely understood. Yet the adults around her, from neighbors to law enforcement, knew they had witnessed something remarkable. The story of a 3-year-old girl, her tabby, and a police dog would ripple across the neighborhood, the city, and eventually the internet. Phones would capture videos, neighbors would retell the tale, and headlines might someday read, "Toddler and K-9 stop criminal in Ohio neighborhood." But for those who were there, the memory was even more vivid. The tension, the fear, the awe, and the undeniable courage of a child who had refused to back down. And James gathered Emma in their arms once more, the weight of pride and relief washing over them. "You're our little hero," whispered. Emma hugged her tabby tightly, glancing at Rex with a small, knowing smile. Martinez and Davis exchanged a glance, silent acknowledgement passing between them. Some nights in law enforcement explanation, and tonight was one of them. As the patrol car's lights faded and the street returned to quiet, the neighborhood remained buzzing with whispers of wonder. A toddler had changed the course of events, stopped a fleeing criminal, and reminded everyone who witnessed it that courage comes in all sizes. Rex, loyal and unwavering, stood beside Emma, a silent guardian of innocence and justice. And Emma, holding her tabby, had discovered her own extraordinary power, the power of words, heart, and bravery, all at 3 years old. The night ended, but the story would live on, a tale of courage, instinct, and the kind of heroism no one could have predicted. And as Emma's parents carried her home, lights dimmed behind them, the world seemed a little brighter, a little braver, and forever changed by the smallest, most unexpected heroine.